Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Answers from the Lab, where we share Mayo Clinic knowledge and advancements on the state of testing and science from laboratory leaders and the people who are making it happen behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Bobbi Pritt, Interim Chair of the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathology at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. With me today is Dr. Bill Morice, the President and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories. This is our weekly discussion with Dr. Morice, in which we learn about updates in the field of laboratory medicine and pathology. Hi, Bill. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Excellent. Welcome back to another week.
Yeah, yes, another week. Now, and it's like immediately summer here in the upper Midwest.
Yes.
It went from, it has been crazy. So, I mean, it's nice, although, not for today maybe, but the bugs have been really bad. So I bet there's going to be a lot of vector-borne infections that we'll be thinking about here over the summer.
Oh, yeah. Make sure when you go outside that you have your bug repellent and your sunscreen on. We'll talk about that in a future date, I'm sure. But for
That's
now,
right.
I wanted to touch base with you. Last
Oh,
fall, we announced to the group how you were taking on your new role as president and CEO of Mayo Clinic Laboratories and other diagnostic services. And I thought we should just check in and see how that's all going. And maybe you could tell us about all of the multitude of things you've been up to.
yeah. Wow. Well, this might be an extended podcast. No, yeah. It's been a very interesting and exciting transition for myself
Mhm.
personally, and really for Mayo Clinic Laboratories, right? Because the whole thought was that really that Mayo Clinic Laboratories enables Mayo Clinic to participate in how we think about diagnostics outside of our walls as well as within Mayo Clinic, right?
Mhm.
Having me go from being the department chair and president of MCL, Mayo Clinic Labs, to be full time at Mayo Clinic Labs. And actually, the parent company right now is called Mayo Collaborative Services, which is not a great name, but it's basically to say that not just growing and thinking about how we could grow and make Mayo Clinic Laboratories more effective, but also other areas of diagnostics where really laboratories, clinical laboratories like Mayo Clinic should be participating and thinking about them because they really will shape the future of our profession in healthcare. And so it's been a very, as you can imagine, that's a pretty broad landscape. That's a big canvas to try and paint on. But one of the focal areas that we have is on remote diagnostics and thinking about even non-biological specimens, electronic signals that involve CV
Mhm.
monitoring, and then a lot of activity that maps more to our traditional labs, but in a new way, is actually our biopharma diagnostics, which is something that we've been very focused on here over the last several months.
Yeah, let's talk more about that because I feel like we've talked about reference lab testing and outreach, but biopharma hasn't really gotten a lot of attention. And I think that's an area people would be interested in. Can you tell us what that is and what it entails?
Sure. Well, I mean, essentially what it entails is working with pharmaceutical industry and also device manufacturers. We can't
Hmm.
forget that as well, as they bring either new drugs that they need to go through clinical trials and identify the testing that's really needed to see if those therapeutics are safe and effective, right?
Hmm.
Number one, we've been thinking about this for a while in the labs in terms of companion diagnostics, but it's bigger than that. It's a real need of the diagnostic industry, or excuse me, the pharmaceutical industry, to kind of look across the spectrum of diagnostics. And then, of course, device manufacturers, they also need to make sure that their devices go through FDA. We experienced this a lot during COVID, where we worked with a lot the at-home testing, Dr. Karen and others, to test and compare and help prepare for submission to FDA some of the different at-home testing or self-testing. You've been involved with that as well.
Yep.
So it really is the both. So, and I think in essence, what it is, it really maps well to two things. Number
Mhm.
one, our focus on innovation at Mayo Clinic, and really thinking about that innovation timeline, that innovation scale, in some ways, has around clinical laboratories has been compressed, right? Because we've all of us in the clinical laboratory think about how we use the lab just in new ways to support patient care. But now there's all these other things that are coming more and more pressing for us to think about how we bring them into our clinical practice. So the more we're participating and working with the pharma industry to understand what therapeutics are coming, provide advisement on some of the tests that would be needed to help to understand if they're working. And then probably most importantly is that as these therapeutics are getting to be more and more targeted
Mhm.
and more expensive, how do we actually identify the patients that will benefit? Again, that really falls back to the clinical laboratory. So what we're doing on the biopharma side is really trying to work with pharma to understand their needs better, but it's really to the purpose that by the time something becomes a clinical test, it really benefits as many patients as possible in terms of knowing who needs to be treated with some of these therapies and how we monitor if they're successful. So that's in essence. It's really kind of a
Mhm.
focus on the innovation piece, and then same also on the device side.
I think that's really important. I know a lot of people in the clinical laboratories. Some people work with pharmaceutical companies, other industries, others don't. But it is important that we have our voice there to help them guide to make sure the testing that for example, may accompany drug use or really show that a diagnostic instrument is working is really a good test. And we've seen some examples that maybe perhaps there isn't the best test as a companion diagnostic. So that's really our role is to help provide that expert advice so that our tests all benefit our patients.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up.
Hmm.
Because there's really two things that I think the clinical labs it brings up two things really. Number one is that if you think about a pharmaceutical company developing a drug and bringing it through clinical trials, or even a device manufacturer developing a new diagnostic modality, they
Hmm.
tend to do it at a very narrow aperture, right? About what's this drug, what's this new test, and you and I both experienced this during COVID. You had tests that came up that they had a singular test around COVID that could be done at a point of care at home. But as laboratorians, we don't think about those single things. We think about how they fit into the greater whole, right? Which really my thinking as I've been in this role is really a diagnostic ecosystem, right? So
Hmm.
each new test that enters in has to enter into an ecosystem that has the patient at the center, right? So that it makes sure that it's the best possible for that patient. And to your point, I mean, clinical laboratories, that's what we do. We think about all the diagnostics and how to best use them for patients. The others are regulators, right? So the companion diagnostic, to your point, it makes a lot of sense that the way the FDA process works is they have to really lock down as part of the clinical trial everything, right? So they'll lock down the test very early because they need to. And it's very
Hmm.
expensive for them to make changes or modifications. And so the other thing is clinical laboratories is just as we've talked about with valid and other things, is really to get engaged with regulators,
Yeah.
help them understand how the clinical laboratory works because you know there's there is thinking within the FDA that maybe this approach to companion diagnostics is not really the best for patients. Maybe it should be more focused like we would think of as laboratorians that we think about what are the performance characteristics of the test, what do they need to be to safely prescribe the drug as opposed to what single
Hmm.
test is everyone going to have to use to prescribe this drug. So I think there's a lot that we can contribute.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Well, I don't know if you could highlight any of the exciting work. I know there have been some recent announcements that have come across with Mayo Clinic Laboratories, BioPharma, and then the Department of Lab Medicine, and some exciting new collaborations.
yeah, I'd love to. I mean, there's a few that we've announced. Again, we have such an amazing integrated practice here at Mayo Clinic, right?
Hmm.
And of course, through the genius of Henry Plummer, we were the first with the integrated medical record. It was paper, it was not electronic,
Yeah.
and it would used to come through the tube system in these plastic packets. I don't know if you remember. I'm old enough that I remember that coming through the tube stations, all these charts, packets of charts, and you could
Hmm.
go back and find notes from 50 years ago on a patient that had been at Mayo that long. Because of our integrated practice, those are the things that really allow us to make insights into who's responding, who needs drugs, where are their needs, just like we identify needs for testing through that. We help us identify who's responding to drugs and where new drugs are needed or new treatments. And then we have, of course, our labs, which are you're now the chair of the department, and I'm not, but I'm still a member of the department. But we have such great staff, both the consultant staff as well as the allied health staff that really across so many different areas. That's really why it's important for us as Mayo to participate is that we just have things that we can offer, but we're not alone in that way. But that has led to even early on companies reaching out to us and wanting to work with us. And a couple are like, and really on that innovative piece. So one really exciting one is Alpenglow, which is
Hmm.
actually a non-destructive tissue technology that provides a 3D view. You can actually, you've seen the videos, they're amazing. You can actually
Fascinating.
you
Absolutely.
fly through, and
Hmm.
we start to think about those are the sorts of things that are going to really transform how we practice pathology, because it takes digital pathology, and all those things are going to drive us from 2D to 3D, right? And
Hmm.
they're going to drive us from a glass slide to data that's in the electronic system interacting with other data, just like in our integrated practice. So that's one. We're announcing one with another company in Chicago, an AI company. So there's now algorithms are a big part of the drug development and biomarker identification pathway. And so we're working on that. Dr. Hip is leading that. He's actually at ASCO this week because oncology is a big focal point for this. But as you know, there's a lot of diseases out there that need new therapies, sepsis, infectious
Hmm.
diseases, and pathogens. But those are just a couple. One is on the physical side, the other is on the more the computational side. But they're all really opportunities to innovate. And again, really think about as a clinical lab, how are these things going to really, how can we work now in those areas to understand how to transform our practice? Going back to the whole Peter Drucker adage, um, the best way to predict the future is to create it, right? So those
Yeah.
are a couple of the exciting partnerships, and I think they provide new opportunities for the department as well, because that's the other piece of this, is that these things are all really expensive, right?
Yeah.
That's the one thing that changed a lot. It's in my time in lab medicine, is that the technologies are becoming more complex and more expensive, so we have to find new ways that are economically sustainable, for us to interact with them. And this is one of them.
Well, I can give you a personal story of a collaboration that's come out of biopharma is TechSite.
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah,
Yes,
can you talk
and
about that?
TechSite, digital pathology and algorithms, and we've now been using this in my lab. And in fact, we talked about it a little bit in one of our recent podcasts. And this allowed us to bring in technology that is really helping our technologists decrease the time it takes to identify parasites in stool specimens by digital scanning in a slide, and then using an algorithm created by TechSite to find the parasites, present them to the technologist, and then the technologist uses that information to make the final call and sign out the case. So it's cutting down our time for screening negative specimens substantially. It's helping us really tackle our workload. And I think in the future, we're going to be doing co-development to do other types of parasite identification in specimens.
Yeah, that's so cool. And I think it also, there's a couple things that it brings up. Number one is that I think all of us have to be aware that the pharma industry itself has become very interested in diagnostics through the pandemic,
Mhm.
and trying to think about if they actually participate in diagnostics, can they actually drive the use of their drugs? So I mean, when you have companies that are I mean, you think about like Pfizer, BioNTech. I mean, they made billions and billions of dollars from the COVID vaccines, and they're
Yeah.
thinking about, well, what about the next therapy? And how would we be more participating in the diagnostics? And so they're getting interested in those same technologies that you're speaking to.
Mhm.
And then the other piece of it, though, is that it really can help. We think of it, biopharma, as very much like, Mayo. We've talked a lot about Mayo, but the reality is that the more we participate in some of the things that you're doing, we can actually drive access, because,
Yes.
I know there's many that are invested in global health. And if COVID taught us anything, is that we have, and monkeypox following on its heels, is that we have to be really invested in global health. And these tools, kind of counterintuitively, can help increase access, because the more we can use things like TechSite to rapidly identify who has a condition, the better we are able to get the pharma industry to get the treatments to those individuals when
Mhm.
they need it, and it can be in a more economically sustainable way, and actually improve access to care.
Yeah, and well, also working with these companies, we're helping them improve or create products that can then be used, that could be available in a format that smaller labs can take on, rather than trying to create their own tests, which could be quite challenging, or trying to validate a laboratory developed test, which can be quite extensive. By having commercially available tests that eventually will be FDA approved or cleared, that makes it much more accessible as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, case in point, I know. I mean, you can confirm that the very same specimens you were talking about, we start to see those go up as sending them through Mayo Clinic Laboratories to
Mhm.
our department, just because of the workforce shortages out there. And it's really not in the best interest of the patient. They're not the kind of things that are so esoteric that they need to come to Mayo. It's just we need to help build the tools that make them more locally available, like you're
Right.
doing. Right. And again, this can all come through understanding how pharma is thinking about diagnostics, helping partner with them and with others with purveyors of technology to really help solve those problems. That's really what it's about. And I think that's, again, goes back to the whole purpose of having me come to this new role, is that
Mhm.
I'm full-time thinking about this kind of intersection between different people, different entities, I should say, in healthcare, and how they intersect with diagnostics and how we can actually build those out. But
Yeah,
biopharma would be an example.
and what you mentioned, Bill, about making sure that testing occurs locally when it needs to, that's something that I've always really just been impressed with. Our mission at Mayo Clinic Laboratories is to make sure the testing that should be done locally is done there, while also enabling the more esoteric testing to be sent to a reference laboratory that has that expertise. And so this would continue along those lines.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's just another area really important, as you and I talk about a lot, for people in the laboratory, clinical laboratory. They might think, oh, pharma, that's treatment, that's not us. I
Mhm.
mean, we really have to pay attention to what's happening in healthcare, because diagnostics is at the center of so much of it.
Absolutely. We're the backbone of all medical practice, in my mind.
Agreed, 100%.
Well, Bill, thank you for all of that information. Very exciting. Lots of great things going on. And we can highlight some of those in future podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and again, hopefully we're building websites and things and other tools. So if people are interested based on what they hear,
Mhm.
uh, reach out to us. We have more info. So because it's good for all of us to stay informed.
Absolutely. All right. Well, until next time, see you later, Bill.
See you, Bobbi.
Thank you so much for tuning in to Answers from the Lab. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and don't forget to tune in every Thursday and every other Tuesday.